Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you and welcome to all participants.
We had an opening ceremony yesterday, and this is the first plenary session for today, and I am your chair and moderator. I am Jae. I am a professor of Department of Ethics Education at Seoul National University of Education. Since 2007, I have been studying research ethics, and I have been engaged in policymaking on research ethics. So recently, data science and research order have been my focus areas. This session's theme and subject is research transparency, accountability, and reproducibility. So, we are going to discuss such issues in this plenary session. In IDW 22, is dealing with this important issue. Today, as you are well aware, the international research ecosystem is multifaceted and complex. It's also rigorous, but also rigorous and reproducible data and research results are important in the current research ecosystem. So, thanks to open science, today's research is supported and strengthened. And the open science, combined with digital technology and international cooperation network, the not transparent knowledge, like it enables knowledge to be more accessible throughout the world. So researchers and all research actors need to ensure transparency, reproducibility, and integrity. And to build a foundation in all steps of research, researchers and all actors need to cooperate together for responsible research. In that regard, I believe this session is being a foundation for good research. The researchers and research agencies and grant agencies, publishers, all actors of research ecosystem need to thoroughly ponder upon this issue. To this end, we have invited a renowned expert in data science to continue this session, and I'm really delighted and honored to chair this session. And this session will be going on for like 60 minutes, and let me first explain about and let me first introduce the speaker, and we will listen to the presentation of the speaker for 30 minutes, and later on we will have a Q&A session, um, getting questions from the floor and also from online participants. So first, let me briefly introduce the renowned expert and speaker for today's plenary session. Personally, I know Professor Mai Har, and I have known her for like 4 to 5 years. Actually, World Research Integrity Conference and Asia Pacific Integrity Network. I met Professor Mai Har like in these conferences for several years, and we have discussed research integrity, and it's a great honor to listen to her wonderful presentation. Mai Har, Professor Mai
Mai Har
Har
Sham is a
Sham.
Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong and Cho Lee, Professor of Biomedical Sciences. Professor Sham is responsible for the development of universities' research capacity, research infrastructure support, research data management, research ethics, integrity, and responsible conduct of research education. Professor Sham has delivered plenary and keynote lectures on the role of universities on research integrity issues in different continents. She was the co-chair for the 6th World Conference on Research Integrity held in Hong Kong in 2019. She is a member of the governing board of the World Conference on Research Integrity Foundation. She obtained her PhD biochemistry in the University of Cambridge and received her postdoctoral training in developmental genetics in National Institute for Medical Research in London, UK. She had previously served as the Associate Vice President, Head of Department of the Biochemistry, Assistant Dean, Director of the Center for Reproduction, Development, and Growth in the Li Ka-shing Faculty of Medicine, the University of Hong Kong.
So I briefly introduced the biography of Professor Sham. So research integrity and open science have been her major studies. She has been really focused on this area, and as a research vice president at Chinese University of Hong Kong, she has been working very hard to establish the research order, and she has abundant experience in building the research integrity related policies. So I believe her presentation will be fruitful and insightful. And let me invite Professor Mai Har Sham. Please give her a big round of applause.
So thank you very much, Professor Lee, for your very, very kind introduction. And it is really my pleasure to speak in this session on reproduction, transparency, and accountability. I trust that you can all hear me well. Okay. So in this session, I'm going to focus a little bit on the role of universities and institutions on promoting responsible conduct of research, and in particular in strengthening research practices. And I will be talking about data management and open science. And I will try to approach the problem of how to promote reproducibility and trustworthy research in 3 different directions. First, I will be talking about research incentives and the environment, the research culture that we are currently in research assessment. And of course, I will touch a little bit on open science and open scholarship. I will talk a little bit on research data management, some of the challenges universities may face, and I will use our own university, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, as an example to share some of our experience. So first of all, about research. Obviously, if we just talk about research and quality research, I think all of us have some idea in ourselves. Nevertheless, in our academic world, even though research can be conducted in many different disciplines and our outcome can be in many different forms, yet we really value publication. We focus a lot of attention in our research output in terms of our publication. And in our part of the world, our government, our grant agencies also focus quite a bit on assessment of our research outcome through evaluation of our publication. So that obviously lead to very metric centric, focusing on impact factors or numbers and so on and so forth. So a lot on the scoring based on assessment of our research publications. Many a time for an individual researcher, all of this, with excellent publication, high impact publication, so on and so forth, you get to promote, to progress along the academic ladder. It will promise, say, you'll get job security, promotion and tenure. And the better you do, the more successful you will be in terms of research grant and the various rewards. And you earn yourself a certain reputation so that your mobility in the academic world, you would be able to excel. For institutions, be it research institute or universities, in fact, these assessments are very, very well aligned because our researchers, our academic staff, the total research publication outcome will aggregate to certain assessment and score from our grant agencies. Sometimes it also inform various ranking agencies. So as a result, it also promises jobs that we can offer to our applicants, our academic colleagues, and of course, in aggregate, our competitiveness in external funding would also be much better, and it earns the reputation of the institution. So these incentives are very well aligned, but it's not necessarily very, very healthy for promoting a research environment and a research culture that should be supporting trustworthy research. Okay, so with such research culture and research environment, at times and in circumstances, it could lead to prolific publications. And one of the possible outcomes is that for people who are really very actively publishing a large volume of research or in a hurry to publish, it will affect the rigor of our study. And as a result, it could lead to reproducibility and replicability problems. A few years ago, there have been studies by many organizations looking into the issue of so-called research waste. There are also times because of the publication in a hurry. So it could lead to selective reporting or salami publishing, or recently also publishing in predatory journals. All of these behavior could lead to high risks of misconduct and questionable research practices. So the original goal of research, and with a public trust about performing research and research activities that is trustworthy and really achieving the quality and the excellence that research assessment are aiming for. So there is really not really in agreement in that sense. So I said earlier that researchers and institutions, in terms of research publication and the research outcome and all these incentives, many a time it's very well aligned because the employment relationship between the researchers is with the institution. Nevertheless, both the investigators and the research institution or the universities are actually in very close association with very many stakeholders in the research community. For government-funded universities and institutions, obviously government policies, research grant agencies' policies will have a direct impact. But when we are talking about research outcome publishing, then publishers also have a very strong input in the research environment and the culture. Some professional bodies, our various collaborators who are also subjected to similar criteria and assessment or input from the research community also directly affect the researchers and the institution. Recently, when we have a very strong promotion of innovation and entrepreneurship, the input of industry-sponsored research also bring in a new dimension of responsible conduct of research issues. So as a result, when we are talking about promoting trustworthy research, it's not just the institute which can do all of this. It's actually requiring a concerted effort from very many stakeholders. Nevertheless, for the researchers, in terms of research practices, it needs to be made understood to everyone who is engaged in research that all of us have an obligation, that is to act in a responsible and honest way, to conduct research that is valid and trustworthy. Sometimes this seems to be said without saying. And we are accountable to the public, not necessarily just because of our grant agencies or so on and so forth, but rather is that it is the public that is giving the researchers a lot of trust. So we are accountable to the public that are step by step leading to whatever research outcome that will be affect the society at the end. So for the institution, the obligation should be to provide education and training for researchers to conduct research in the highest standard. And it is not just saying so, but to provide the necessary infrastructure, training, and the support, or sometimes it's resources, so that the two parties, that is the researchers and the institutions, while the outcome is very, very well aligned, there should be sufficient support and training available. In terms of incentives for research and research assessment practices, over the years, there have been a lot of effort, now 10 years now, since the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, that is DORA, that was arising with a very, very clear guideline in terms of how research assessment should be conducted. And there is also the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics. The UK Research and Innovation, Research England, had published this study called the Metric Tide. So there have been quite a few efforts all over the world in reviewing research assessment practices. In the World Conference on Research Integrity, the 6th WCRI that was held in 2019, there were sessions that colleagues who were participating in that conference came up with the Hong Kong Principles, which is now published in PLOS Biology. And in this Hong Kong Principles, the idea, the main 5 principles as shown in here, is to encourage the research community to, in assessing research, pay attention to the entire process of research, from conception of the research study to the design, to the conduct and methodology, the analysis, towards reporting, publication, towards dissemination, in each of the steps to value the process as well as the outcome. So to value complete reporting, whether they are positive outcome, I mean in finding positive answers or negative answers. Most importantly, to assess reproducible research practices. To reward the practice of open science, such as open methods and data, to acknowledge a broad range of research activities and not just research publications, and to recognize other contributions such as peer review or mentoring. So the idea for these 5 principles is for the research community really to reward trustworthy research. As a result, to provide responsible incentives for the researchers, and together we should be able to build a research environment that is conducive for promoting responsible conduct as well as trustworthy research outcome. Now, while this is easier said, but to actually implement these principles is not so straightforward. So in the most recent 7th World Conference on Research Integrity that was held in Cape Town just last month, just actually at the beginning of the month. In one of the sessions, I have also shared some of my views in terms of the challenges in implementing the Hong Kong principles in assessment of researchers. First of all, I think even in the audience today, I'm not sure that everyone is aware of the Hong Kong principles or aware of the current culture and the so-called the incentives for assessment of researchers. What are the issues? The understanding and the awareness is heterogeneous. For those who are aware, the availability of alternatives and working models for research assessment is also lacking. because research, there are so many research disciplines. It is always easy to go for the easy metrics and the numbers and so on. When evaluating reproducibility, for example, it is not so straightforward. And in the leadership, determination to change the assessment criteria, the assessment system, and the assessment culture, that determination is also not so easy because there is always the practice that people are used to. And for the institutional leaders, grant agencies, and any other stakeholders who can make decision, guidance would also be helpful. There are also technical challenges in the implementation, say in the administrative system, in the resource requirement, in many of the human resource practice, say annual appraisal, promotion and tenure panel, all of this in terms of changing the assessment criteria, it will lead to a domino effect in terms of the resource and technical requirement. There are also diversity and inclusion issues. There are discipline-specific requirements in different parts of the world because of our the status of the maturity of the research systems, our funding, and so on. There are many regional and local cultural challenges. So it really is making the change in the culture of assessment of research and assessment of researchers really challenging. So therefore, in the research integrity community, all of us have been calling for sharing of implementation examples. And if there are good practices that can be shared, it will be very helpful for the research community. Today, we are not just talking about assessment of research, but I hope that while in the Hong Kong principles, we talk about value, reproducibility, open science, open data, and so on, how can we have these infrastructure support in place, in the first place, and then how can we assess the research outcome through this platform? I think that it really is calling for collaboration from various institutions. If we have good examples to share, or using platform like today, like these conferences, it will be very helpful for moving forward. Now, I will turn to the topic about open science. Now, even though I'm a biomedical scientist, but I am in a comprehensive university. So we do have a very large arts faculty, humanities faculties, and faculty of business administration. Although digital and data science is very, very invasive, many what we call the non-STEM disciplines are also handling a large volume of data. Nevertheless, I think that the other terms, the so-called open research and open scholarship, sometimes are also used interchangeably. So when we say open science is not a topic that is relevant for scientific discipline only, it really is referring to the openness of the research practice. The idea, or some people call it a movement of open research or open science, is to really allow all our researchers to be aware that the two levels, one is to allow the research outcome accessible to all levels of society. So here we are talking about open access of the research outcome. Usually it is in the form of a publication. And it is based on the principle that research should be as open, as transparent as possible. But when we talk about the transparent, open, and reproducible research, that is not just about open access. It's not just about facilitating the knowledge sharing and so on, so that other researchers and other people in the society can access the outcome. And it is really also about the process of the research, because if the process is open and transparent, it will be opening up possibilities for other researchers to verify or to replicate the study. And clearly it will facilitate data sharing and the reuse, also based on the existing data. So it will lead to innovation and further innovation and further research outcome. When we talk about open science, it is including the two parts, the open access, the open research data, as well as the process of transparency, transparent process in the research. So it really is asking, quite a broad scope. I do note that in this conference, there are other sessions who will be dealing directly on open science and open research. The concept about this is that with the increasing transparency, it will benefit the research community. But it requires the cooperation of the research community as a whole. It requires awareness, policy and guidance, incentives, education, and so on and so forth. From the point of view of a university, I can share a little bit about what is happening in Hong Kong, but I can also see that we are an example. Being here, I can also see quite a few practices in the Asia Pacific regions, the various universities that are of a similar or different research maturity. By and large, it will call for a few things. First of all, institutional leadership policies and commitment is very, very important. And we really need education and training. Even though we have been talking about open science and open research, it is getting a lot of attention in Europe, for example, but in our part of the world, it is still very, very unfamiliar. And it does need cooperation and development with government and research grant agencies in particular, because for government-funded institutions, there's a very, very close tie with the higher level policies. We can, of course, address the challenges in open science and data management, which is the topic of today. It also can address the current development in terms of data, digital development, as well as technologies development. With the current pandemic, still lingering around in our part of the world, the increasing digital interactions would also call for more transparency. So there are these new challenges in innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on. So all of these are what the universities are facing. So as we are moving forward, what can we do? So in Hong Kong, we have a Research Grants Council under the University Grants Committee that is the major funder for all government-funded universities. As a grant body, the UGC and the RGC are very serious about responsible conduct of research. They only just updated their guidelines for handling research misconduct cases in the December of 2020, just about 2 years ago. And they focus a lot on the practice and conduct of research grant application. And it is fairly open. All the cases that are handled by the Research Grant Council are open. One can actually access and find out a number of cases and so on, and what are the outcome when they are found, when misconduct is found. So that's one thing. Another direction that our grant agency is quite serious on are a few things. Say they do require universities to set up and review ethical standards. The latest one is to call for all our universities to set up ethics review for research studies involving artifacts, say archaeological or museum pieces and so on. I think we are all used to having human research ethics, behavioral research ethics, animal research ethics, and so in this case, it's an expansion to include arts and humanities type of studies. Secondly, our grant body is encouraging open access publications to such an extent that the direction is to aim at the research grant funded projects will be publishing in open access platform. That's the direction. So at the moment, one thing that is really worth mentioning is that our grant bodies is prepared to commit resources to universities to fund open access publication. So that's at least a direction. But as I said, open research, open science is not just about open access. It is actually also about the practice of transparency in conducting research. But as a grant agency, this direction does sort of highlight the focus of the government and point out a direction that universities and researchers can follow. Second, about research data management, again, the movement is that research data management plan will be becoming compulsory in a while. It is not compulsory today, but the direction and the hint is that it will become compulsory for all. research grant funded, at least the RGC grant funded projects. So with that, in the universities, we'll be echoing the funders. And we need to do quite a bit of work in terms of promoting the awareness of our researchers, in terms of the importance of reproducibility, replicability, and transparency of the research work. And we need to put in place tools that will support reproducibility training and best practices. Some of these are just the research methodology and record keeping. Moving on to the data management and data repository, again, it is actually quite costly. Nevertheless, if the institute is committed to it, then we will need to provide infrastructure support and training. In 2015, there was a publication in Science talking about the top guideline, Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines. It was originally proposed by a collection of journals and publishers and funders and professional societies and so on. By now, it is already having quite a bit of awareness in some parts of the world, not so much in Asia Pacific region though. So this guideline is quite helpful for institutions who are designing their practice within the institution in terms of guiding the researchers. So here I have extracted the so-called guidelines. It is very complex. It's a publication there, but in here it sets up various levels of transparency and practice, say citation standards, data transparency, and so on and so forth. And what is helpful is that in this top guideline, there are levels of achievement so that the practitioners, if you like, will be able to see how far they can commit or they are prepared to commit, and also how they are progressing in terms of achieving transparency and openness in promoting the research practices. I must say here we are still very, very early in this direction. We have some awareness, but in terms of the training, we are moving towards this direction, as I'm going to highlight. So in Hong Kong, all the 8 government-funded universities, we have an organization called JULEC, the Joint University Library Advisory Committee. So together as on the level of scholarly communication with the commitment of all the university presidents, there is a position statement on open scholarship. So as a whole, the universities in Hong Kong support open scholarship and with this particular sort of the direction. But we are still very, very early in terms of practicing the open research and open science. So now I will share a little bit about what we have been doing in my university, in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Like other universities, the university senior management have been clearly committed to promoting research integrity. We have clear policies on research misconduct, in handling research misconduct, and also very clear setup on research ethics committee in approving various research processes. And we have, about 2 years ago, started very strongly in supporting research data management with infrastructure support and the training. So we have, first of all, set up research data management guidelines and disseminated to all the various researchers from undergraduate, postgraduate students to postdoctoral fellows to all the academic staff. And we have infrastructure support for data repository and data sharing, and of course, various training and education. And in this regard, we work very closely with our library, who has a data management librarian, as well as scholarly communication librarian to help our researchers. So here we will provide training to our researchers in terms of understanding the data life cycle and their responsibility in managing the data, in storing the data, processing the data, as well as when it comes to publishing, and later in preservation of the data, what the researcher's role will be. So we adopt this FAIR principle: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Again, I note that in this particular conference, there are quite a few sessions going to talk about the FAIR data management. Here, I just point out that In our university, we do adopt this principle, and in our training as well as just in our management of the data. So here is again a description of the FAIR principle about how, at least on the management side, we are committed to train our colleagues in this direction. So we have a data library, data management librarian who is a group of them, who will provide research data service. As you can see in this, just a screenshot. We even have a research data management consultation service providing to particularly our junior researchers. For the data management plan, we have these education material that are available online, and we do use commercial platforms, commercial vendor that would help us. This is by no means publicizing anything or any particular supplier, but I'm just using this to show you that there is resource commitment, and institutions will need to really think about workable solutions for their particular community. So we use this DMP tool adopted to our university, and we require all the research postgraduate students to submit their research data management plan. Is compulsory. I mentioned earlier, for research grant applications, we are also going towards this direction, that the government, our grant body, will be requiring us to submit the plan for all the grant-supported projects. We have various training workshops, from very basic understanding of research data management to writing the plan, to using our in-house research data repository, and so on and so forth. So here are some examples of the workshops that we organize. We haven't been doing it for a long time yet. We have just launched the research data management, even the data repository system, just about 2 years. So far, we are still working very, very hard to promote and uplift the awareness of our colleagues. For research data repository, this is really a very, very long way, because it has various considerations in terms of the volume of data storage, and in handling the data, archiving the data, responsibility of the researcher, and so on. Nevertheless, we do have this infrastructure in place, and we hold on to the so-called trust principles for digital repository. Again, here we have transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology. So the infrastructure and training support is very strongly required. So we have launched this research data repository. So far, we have already over 100 data sets hosted in our in-house repository. An example I want to share is just a colleague in our School of Life Sciences, Jerome Hui. He deposited this data set after he published a paper on the millipede genome. And within the university community, other researchers didn't know Jerome Hui, but knowing that there is this data set available, they started working together. So within in-house, this data repository system does encourage in-house data reuse. When we are talking about publication, when the data is in the journals and in the public domain, of course, it does facilitate reusing of the data and data sharing in a big way, particularly in my field in biomedical sciences. So I think we are just beginning to see a change, a change or a new practice in terms of data use. Here is another example of data reuse, and we have even students, at the students level, studying data analytics and using the data that is put in our data repository. So we are seeing a lot of positive outcome from this. So as a university, we are continuing to see new challenges in improving the reproducibility and transparency of our research. We are continuously working in promoting trustworthy research outcome. Nevertheless, in our actual research practice, we are seeing an expansion of data science and data volume, not just in the STEM subject, as I said, even in the arts and humanities subject. So it is calling for more and more infrastructure support. It also needs education and training on new skill sets that some of us who are established researchers may not be very familiar with. And it also calls for quality assurance of research work in a new way. Today, we don't talk so much on innovation and entrepreneurship. However, that opens up a new direction of sort of risks that we need to manage in terms of conflict of interest, selective reporting. Again, it requires different kinds of skill sets and education and training. When it comes to the post-COVID pandemic, the new normal situation, I think we can see that we are relying more and more on online environment and virtual interactions. It does make supervision of project teams and trainees a little bit harder. At the same time, it facilitates interactions that we couldn't do just by face-to-face interaction. So again, the quality assurance of research work is another dimension in the post-pandemic era. So these are new challenges for institutions. So what can universities do? You have seen this slide before in a slightly different form. We just have to continue with our effort in improving the awareness of our colleagues, the importance of reproducibility, replicability, and transparency of the research work in order to promote trustworthy research outcome. I have mentioned several times about infrastructure support and training. When it comes to data repository, data management, open data platform, at least for our university, this remains a challenge. We have started, but I can already see that it does need continuous effort and building up and strengthening our data platform. The open research policy and support still need a lot of work because we are only beginning, we're only beginning in promoting the awareness of open research in Hong Kong and in the Asia Pacific regions, as far as I can see. As for the assessment, the research assessment principles, I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that the implementation still need quite a bit of concerted effort. So with that, I will end my talk here. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your great presentation. As you heard, our Professor Mai Har has focused on data management, open science, and so on, especially at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and she focused especially on the principles and training and education, and she gave examples of those during her presentation. I hope the participants today, as a researcher and someone who is training and educating the researchers in educational institutions, or as someone working at an institute who is giving out grants or working at government agencies, making the policies. I hope all of you, all stakeholders, think about the collaboration that our professor talked about. We talked about so many various factors that are interconnected to secure research integrity and good research. We discussed what we need to think about for our research integrity. I think that we can wrap that up. And after you've heard her presentation, maybe someone from the floor or someone participating online may have questions and may have different perspectives on what we are facing as challenges. So, Professor, there are some questions that are online. I think you can access them on your end. Maybe we could hear your answer for those questions. Can you put up the question? Thank you.
Yeah, as you correctly point out, incentives are misaligned for open science practice. The most successful researchers are publishing over 50 articles a year in closely working clusters of researchers, and this practice is encouraged. The papers, especially relying on students working, have obvious errors in their work, but research crowds do not let anyone else even near their studies. Journals rely on the reputation of the senior most authors to get articles through. How do you expect open science to take off in this context? Please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. This is not an easy question, but I think it's also very important and very valuable. So the question, there are two parts. First of all, is what we value today. So indeed, you know, when we see somebody who is publishing very prolifically, you know, every year you publish a large number of papers, this behavior at the moment seems to be encouraged. So I think that we may be able to do something about this. That means are we really encouraging prolific outcome, prolific publication in particular? You know, research outcome can be broad. And in some universities that I am in close association with, sometimes I also serve on evaluation, assessment of researchers for their promotion and tenure. I have seen practices in some places, which is you don't evaluate the researcher for their total research outcome, but ask for a few, say 4 or 5 of their best research outcome that they choose. In fact, in research assessment exercise in the UK, it is also a little bit like that. So in a 5-year, 6-year period, the researcher, highlight your best outcome in this period of time, but not total, you know, not hundreds, but you find your best pieces. From there, with peer review, the evaluation of the actual work, quality of work, and the impact of the work, you could actually tell a lot. So therefore, in this first part, I think in changing the assessment criteria and evaluation process, I think it's doable. For example, it is difficult to influence other people. But if you just talk about within a university, just your own university, in annual appraisal, in your actual, say, promotion from junior to senior level, if the university wants to promote trustworthy, responsible conduct of research or real high quality research, which you can promote, then we can put in-house just within your own institution a different criteria, such as the one I was talking about, say focusing on the best few or focusing on a portfolio. Other than the research output, what does this colleague do? Does he or she supervise student? Do they serve on very many sort of journals in reviewing other research journal articles, so on? Basically, I'm more or less speaking about the Hong Kong principles in terms of evaluation. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is that at the moment, assessment is still very much relying on publication, either the number, impact factor, or so on. But if we want to promote open science, the idea of promoting open science is not just for the sake of promoting open science. To promote open science is because we are promoting a practice of open and transparent research so that the process can be shared. Say, for example, the methodology, a lot of colleagues promote sort of registration of studies and so on. But the idea is to put the process of research in a publicly accessible domain in one way or the other, so that there will be peer review and peer support, and therefore in various steps of conducting the research work, there is sort of external review, if you like, sort of the community assessment. Sometimes it's not even just about the actual review and you know that other people are looking at you. It's not just about an assessment from the external side, but rather it's the thought process and the planning of the research process in making it transparent. Now, I think this part is a lot harder because to call for open practice, basically, it does require the entire community to put in a lot of effort. I'm a biomedical scientist. Professor Lee already introduced you. So we are not so used to putting our publication in open publication platforms such as bioRxiv and so on. So most of the time we are guarding our research outcome. We keep it until the day we feel that we are ready to publish. Then we publish, and this is the, this is the attitude. And also when it comes to the data, I shared this some time ago. So I do sequencing. I'm a developmental geneticist. So I actually need to apply for a research grant to conduct very costly experiment of genomics or single cell transcriptomics. So there was a time when we feel that we invested and we got these data and we are not ready to share until our publication is accepted or already published. But I have seen that our practice is changing because of the community, not because of our university, because I have seen that other researchers are putting their data in the public domain. We benefit from it because we can use other people's data, reuse other people's transcriptome data, sometimes before they publish, sometimes after they publish. So therefore, with the actual research community willing to share and willing to put their research effort into a more transparent arena, then our culture and our behavior will change. So in that second part about open science, it's not so much our research institution or our organization can do. It's more to do with what the research community is doing. Here we are informing the universities and the institutions to open up and to support more in terms of the open science practice. So I guess the question you are asking is precisely what we are here discussing about. It's not so easy, which is why there are lots of people who have been talking about many different kinds of principles. The real challenge is the implementation and the practice, the actual doing of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that was a really comprehensive answer for the question, and to summarize, so there are the principles the researchers need to comply with and follow, and by asking researchers to follow those principles and guidelines, we will be able to improve the research integrity and transparency. And I completely agree. And as a chair, I also came to have one question. So, publish and perish, in the research community, there is a huge stress on researchers. So what is a good researchers know what is good science and good research, but they tend to be mired in questionable or detrimental research practices due to this huge stress. And I think it was last May, and science, I read a paper on Science Advance, and it said the reproducible researches are quoted a lot and published a lot compared to unreproducible research. So I thought, and also that paper said that some papers are actually more popular, although they are not transparent and integral. So there are such wrong practices, and can I listen to your experience or opinion in that regard?
About the in the already published work, there is a large volume of the work that are not necessarily reproducible. So your question is about what could the journals do? I have the feeling that publishers and journals are, we really cannot hold them responsible. It is the researchers because the researchers really need to safeguard their research to make sure that their work is conducted in a way that is true, true and trustworthy. Many a time, I think that in our research culture, researchers are not necessarily adopting the methodology that are aiming at getting the reliable research outcome. I think that many people have already studied this, using particularly statistical platform, sample size, and the process of research and so on. So at the end of the day, I think it is the researchers and their immediate research environment. So usually it is their laboratories or their institutions. So therefore, it really is asking for higher awareness of the need for producing reproducible research outcome, as well as quality assurance within the research unit. I think that quality assurance of research is something we rarely do. You see, our researcher, they conduct the research work, they publish. It is the responsibility of the research team's head, if you like. Institutions rarely conduct quality assurance, not even spot check. It is all we are all relying on each of the researchers practicing in an honest way. So at the end of the day, it is in one of my slides, the obligation of the researcher is the highest, and the institution's task is to provide an environment that is improving their awareness. It is difficult to rely on journals to screen through whether those data are reproducible or not. In terms of transparency, we could impose to some extent that many of these code, data, software, packages are put into the open, so that in a peer, there will be some review process that are going on. So this is a kind of movement, a little bit aligned with the top guideline that are called for by a whole collection of publishers. So that's the external research culture and the research environment. We can have these in place, but going back to the actual conduct of the research, it will still be with the researchers. Thank you very much. Jae, is a very good question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, any questions from the floor? Please, anyone? Yeah, there is one person. Please give him a mic.
Thank you, Professor Sham. Just a quick question. You mentioned the different, Mark Hannell from Figshare. You mentioned the different incentives from the different areas, but you also mentioned that Hong Kong is getting potentially government incentivization or being told that the research grants will have to be making their data open available. Do you think there's a danger that countries that don't have funders that mandate open data will be left behind? Or do you think the institutions alone will be able to drive open science, open data incentivization for researchers? Because the publishers might be able to check it, but if there's no stick coming from the funders, is the efforts of the institutions going to be enough in some countries?
Thank you very much. Again, this is a really very, very good question. While I share our experience in Hong Kong, I think that our research grant body is only beginning. When I say that they are funding open access publication, that is these, APC cost, that sort of thing. And when they call for open data, very likely they are going to rely on institutions to make their ends meet. So they're unlikely to fund all of this. So your question is extremely valid, because in calling for open science, open data, open practice, it is also raising the issue of inequality. At the moment, open access publication is extremely expensive. Not everybody can afford. We have JULAC, that is the Joint University Library, and we may be able to get a little bit better of the bargaining power and so on, but still, we are really talking about a very, very small percentage in the overall picture. So that's why in the open research, that is including open access publication and open data, unless the publishers, which is a very, very important stakeholder in the whole of the research arena, are working closely with the real research community. That means that there is always a balance between the business and the profit, as well as promoting research and the research outcome. nevertheless, they are business. They have to they have to make the profit that's fair and square. So therefore, would institutions just pick that up and support all of that and make it work? I'm afraid it's not so easy, because I think that what we are calling for with the open practice, open research practice, is really for everybody to lighten up on the so-called research outcome. Why are we so holding so tight to what you have published, where you publish, and so on? So I guess that's ultimate, right? That's ultimately, but we have to be practical. Realistically, we see the research culture today, and what we can do will have to be step by step, a little bit at a time. I share the example of Hong Kong is exactly that we are only moving a very small step forward. And the bigger step forward has to be within the research community for the researchers themselves to really change their research practice. I really call for this quite seriously. This is because we are propagating it from our current practice to even the newcomer, even the research students and the postdoc. They are practicing what we are practicing, but that's not necessarily very good for the entire research community. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. And the next question.
Professor Sham, thank you for your presentation, especially speaking from an Asian university perspective. My name is Jae Shim. I'm a professor here at Sangkyungan University here in Seoul, Korea. Every single university in Korea provides some kind of cash incentive for every research article produced because universities want to boost their research productivity. And when we advise our university presidents to stop that and change our research culture to closely align with open access and open research, open data, in practice, they say, okay, let universities in Europe and US do that, and we'll catch up when the time is right. Is there any best rationale that we can give to our university presidents and policymakers that we should start action now rather than later?
I think you already gave the answer. Yeah, it's obviously the now. Yeah, there's always what we can do now. I think your question about rewarding research publication, that is research outcome, in a monetary way, I think in Korea you're not alone. I think there are other places who are doing that. This actually reflects a little bit about the entire research system, maturity. You see that some other places, they don't do that anymore. It is because the researchers are already having their own sort of incentive aligned with whatever the research environment is needed. I think that for the Asia Pacific area, maybe we could put our thoughts together a little bit. There are times that we may be able to leapfrog, we don't have to practice everything step by step. Is that if we are aware that using the current incentive in promoting the research outcome is not necessarily healthy or good for either the quality of the research or for elevating either the researcher or the institution in terms of their research impact. I think that we should focus more on the impact, that is, what is the research leading to in terms of benefiting the society. So instead of working through step by step, if we focus on what are the reasonable assessment and incentive criteria that we can put in to promote responsible research impact, then we will be able to put in place certain models and alternatives. I think that, of course, this is easier said than done as well, but it could be a direction that we can work together towards. Because you also mentioned the Asia Pacific area, which I agree with you. Asia is very big and we are very heterogeneous in terms of our research practice. Some are more mature than the other. Some are better off economically than the other. And nevertheless, there are a little bit similar cultural similarity. So therefore, we need more dialogue and communication in order to find, work out something that can encourage a behavior, research behavior that promote trustworthy research outcome. And that's what everybody wants. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. While listening to your answer, I think providing the justifiable incentive to researchers. I don't think the incentive should be provided just based on how many researches they published, or whether they published their articles on renowned journals. I think we will need to only incentivize trustworthy, reproducible, and replicable and researches only. And even if these researchers got the incentives, if they turn out to have problems with reproducibility, replicability, and integrity, I think we will need to maybe like um get the incentive back, remove the incentive again later on as a punishment. That was just my comment. Anyone from the floor? Any other questions from online? The technical.
Yeah, there's one question in the Q&A box. That is, in your ethics reviews after establishing the principles, have you found examples of unethical practices? Now, the so-called ethics review is usually before the research is conducted. So if there are protocols and so on that are not in agreement with the ethical standard, usually they are not approved. So therefore, our ethics committees repeatedly receive complaints from our researchers that why is their protocol not approved, or why are we spending so long in going through their application? That is exactly that's the safeguard. So if there are application for ethical approval, that's the step that we can safeguard the process that is reliable. I think today what we are talking about is not so much at the beginning. I mean, they have to apply for ethical approval anyway, but it is about after that, in the conduct of the research process, when it gets to the outcome. When it gets to the outcome, usually there's no more screening, because the outcome, the responsibility for the outcome is with the researcher. Institutions do not screen the outcome anymore. They are free to publish, with whichever platform and on whatever content. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think also in Korea, there is a ethics review committee, but when they do what they do, they look at whether the researcher is doing proper research regarding their subjects and whether they are conducting properly. But regarding what you said, the review itself, the scope of it should be expanded so that there are transparency and integrity in their research. It should be done prior to their research and also after they have their research outcomes. I think that is what I understood. I think that is very meaningful and a very good opinion for the review. Right now, the scope of review is very narrow, but it is very complex, and there are many complaints that this review should. The review process itself is very complicated. Maybe the examples that you gave regarding your university gave a lot of insights to the participants. Maybe if there are no more questions from the floor, our session was supposed to be 60 minutes until 9:30. Because of your active participation, we went 10 minutes over time. So, and because we don't have any more additional questions, we will wrap up the session here. I heard that the time in Hong Kong is 1 hour earlier. So I think it's like 8:40 there. Thank you so much for being with us at an early time today. Thanks to you, we had a very fruitful session for our plenary session this morning in IDW 2022. Also, thank you to all the participants here on the floor as well as the online participants. I would like to thank all participants who have traveled far from abroad. I hope you have a great time in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.